She walked into Bellini's restaurant in rags, a forgotten soul seeking only a meal. The wealthy patrons mocked her, laughing as the manager gripped her arm to throw her out. What they didn't know was that beneath those tattered clothes stood a decorated Navy SEAL commander, abandoned by the country she had sacrificed everything to protect. When she broke free and approached the grand piano, they expected more entertainment at her expense. Then, her fingers touched the keys. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story moved you, consider subscribing to join our community, where we uncover the extraordinary heroes hidden in plain sight. The restaurant buzzed with expensive conversation and the delicate clink of fine crystal. Outside, rain poured relentlessly, creating a watery barrier between two worlds. Commander Astera Riven stood in that rain, her threadbare coat offering little protection as she watched the celebration through steamy windows. Inside, Senator Quentin Albright accepted applause for his Veteran Support Initiative, a program that, with elegant political sleight of hand, had actually diverted millions away from veteran mental health services. A photographer snapped pictures as he raised his glass in a toast. "To our brave men and women in uniform," his voice carried through speakers positioned around the restaurant. "The least we can do is ensure they're taken care of when they return home." The irony wasn't lost on Astera. Her rain-soaked reflection in the window showed a woman barely recognizable from the decorated officer she'd once been. Her hair, once kept in a precise military cut, now hung in uneven lengths around her hollow face. The scars visible on her neck and hands told stories that her silence had kept buried for 3 years. Astera's hand unconsciously moved to her collarbone, feeling for medals that were no longer there. Her movements, despite years on the streets, maintained a military precision. The small leather case strapped across her body was her only possession of value, though its worth wasn't monetary. She watched as Senator Albright worked the room, shaking hands with donors and posing for photographs. Something about his face triggered a fragment of memory. A briefing room, his signature on papers that would change the course of her life forever. The memory brought a surge of anger that warmed her against the chill of her wet clothes. When she finally decided to enter, the maitre d' moved to intercept her, but Astera slipped past with a tactical efficiency that surprised even herself. Water pooled beneath her worn boots on the marble floor. Conversations momentarily faltered as patrons noticed her, dirty, disheveled, clearly not belonging in their cultivated environment. Astera approached a table near the center of the room, where a group of well-dressed women were midway through their appetizers. "Excuse me," she said, her voice a rough whisper. "Could you spare some food?" One woman looked up, pearls gleaming at her throat. Her expression shifted from surprise to disgust in an instant. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice carrying. "Server, there's a situation here." Astera moved away before staff could respond, approaching another table where businessmen in expensive suits were engaged in conversation. One man glanced up at her, then pointedly returned to his discussion without acknowledging her presence. Each rejection pushed her closer to Senator Albright's table. Perhaps it was coincidence, or perhaps some part of her had planned this all along. When she approached his gathering, restaurant manager Desmond Harker intercepted her, his manicured fingers digging into her arm. "Ma'am, you need to leave," he announced loudly, ensuring nearby diners would hear his swift response to their discomfort. "I served," Astera whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. "I just need something to eat." "Sure you did," sneered a woman at the senator's table, adorned with diamond earrings that caught the light. "We all serve something." Laughter rippled through the restaurant. Senator Albright shifted uncomfortably, but signaled to Harker with a quick gesture. "Get her out." The humiliation felt familiar to Astera. Since Operation Cerberus had gone wrong, since waking up in a foreign hospital with no identification and no country willing to claim her, shame had become a constant companion. The government she had served had erased her service, her very existence. Being invisible had its advantages in her line of work, until it became her permanent state of being. As Harker began steering her toward the exit, Astera's gaze landed on the baby grand piano in the corner. The pianist had stepped away, leaving the instrument momentarily unattended. Something in her eyes changed, a fog lifting, revealing a clarity and purpose that had been absent moments before. She stopped walking, planting her feet in a stance that would be immediately recognizable to anyone with military training. Harker felt the change in her posture, but misunderstood its meaning. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he warned, tightening his grip. Astera didn't respond verbally. Words had become difficult for her after the explosion, after months of isolation and untreated trauma. Instead, she looked directly at Senator Albright, catching his eye across the room. There was a flicker of something in his expression, not quite recognition, but discomfort. "Someone call security," a voice called out. With a controlled movement that spoke of years of combat training, Astera broke free from Harker's grasp. The motion was economical, precise, causing no harm but effectively releasing his hold. Gasps echoed through the restaurant as she moved with sudden determination toward the piano. "She's going to steal something," someone shouted. Two security personnel began moving in her direction. But Astera walked directly to the piano and removed her soaked coat. Underneath, her arms revealed a map of scars, burn marks, shrapnel damage, and surgical lines that told stories of battlefield trauma. Her thin frame showed evidence of malnourishment, but her posture had transformed into something unmistakably military. "Oh, this is going to be good," laughed a young executive at a nearby table. Street performance from the local crazy lady. From her leather case, Astera removed a faded photograph rather than the weapon many feared. She placed it carefully on the piano, an image of herself in dress uniform with a small team of elite operators, their faces partially blurred for security reasons. The photograph was one of the few possessions she had managed to keep during her descent into homelessness. "We've called the police," Harker announced, though his voice had lost its edge of certainty. There was something about the woman's demeanor that gave him pause, a dignity that seemed at odds with her appearance. Astera positioned scarred hands over the keys. Her fingers trembled slightly, evidence of nerve damage that had never fully healed. Around the restaurant, several diners raised phones, expecting entertaining footage for social media. A homeless woman making a scene at Bellini's would certainly generate likes and shares. From the back of the room, investigative journalist Zara Thorne watched intently. Unlike the others, she recognized something in Astera's bearing, in her scars. Something that didn't align with the narrative of a typical homeless woman. Zara had spent years covering military operations and veterans' issues. She moved closer, her reporter's instinct telling her something significant was unfolding. When Astera began to play, the effect was immediate. Her fingers, despite their tremor, coaxed from the piano the complex emotional notes of Chopin's ballad number, 1 in G minor. This wasn't the halting amateurish playing expected of someone in her condition. This was mastery, technical perfection, paired with raw emotional depth that silenced every conversation in the restaurant. The notes filled the space with something beyond music, a story told in a language more universal than words. It spoke of determination, of suffering, of betrayal, and ultimately of an unwavering spirit that refused to be broken completely. As she played, fragmented memories surfaced in Astera's mind, playing out alongside the music like a disjointed film. She remembered leading her team through a mountainous terrain, communicating through silent hand signals as they approached their target, the helicopter extraction under heavy fire, making split-second decisions that kept her wounded teammates alive, the piano in the military base recreation room, where she played for soldiers with injuries worse than her own, offering them a moment of beauty amidst pain. And finally, the explosion. The moment when everything changed, when a mission deemed too politically sensitive was disavowed, and those who survived it became liabilities rather than heroes. The restaurant fell completely silent, the magic of the moment transforming judgment into awe. Senator Albright's face drained of color, recognition dawning as the performance continued. He whispered something to an aide, who quickly left the room, phone in hand. Zara Thorne approached a retired military officer she recognized at a nearby table. "That's Commander Astera Riven, isn't it?" she whispered. "Task Force Phantom." The officer nodded slowly, stunned. "They told us she was dead. There was a memorial service at Arlington 3 years ago." As the piece reached its crescendo, Astera's playing became almost violent in its intensity, her body swaying with the force of emotions long suppressed. When she struck the final note, the silence that followed was profound, a void filled with uncomfortable truth that hung in the air between performer and audience. She rose from the bench, took the photograph, and turned to face the crowd. Her posture had transformed completely, straight-backed, commanding, the homeless woman entirely gone, replaced by the officer she had once been. Looking directly at Senator Albright, she spoke clearly for the first time since entering the restaurant. Operation Cerberus. Her voice carried easily in the silence. You left us there to die, then erased us when we survived. Security guards who had been approaching stopped in their tracks. One of them, a younger man who recognized the name of the classified operation, came to attention and rendered a crisp salute. In that moment, power dynamics shifted. The woman they had mocked, the beggar they had scorned, stood revealed as something else entirely, and the respected senator, the champion of veterans' causes, suddenly looked like a man confronted by a ghost he had hoped would never return. Zara stepped forward, phone recording. Commander Riven, 3 years ago, you led a classified mission that officially never happened. Your team was reported killed in a training accident. The journalist moved with purpose, positioning herself between Astera and the security personnel. Her presence changed the dynamic further, introducing an element that Senator Albright clearly hadn't anticipated: media attention. Senator Albright rose nervously. This woman is clearly disturbed, he said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. She needs help, not an audience. This woman, interrupted an older gentleman who stood from a corner table, is the recipient of the Navy Cross. The man was Admiral Thaddeus Winthrop, retired, once Astera's commanding officer. His authoritative presence commanded immediate attention. Winthrop walked to Astera and stood beside her, his aging frame still carrying the unmistakable bearing of a career naval officer. I attended her funeral. Closed casket, of course. The revelation rippled through the restaurant. Several veterans among the crowd stood in solidarity, their postures straightening in unconscious respect. A woman in her 30s with a prosthetic leg visible beneath her dress rose, her expression a mixture of shock and dawning understanding. Harker approached with Astera's coat, offering it with newfound deference. I apologize, ma'am. Your dinner is on the house tonight. I don't want charity, Astera said firmly. I want the truth exposed. Zara stepped forward. And that's exactly what's going to happen. The scene at Bellini's transformed from a simple confrontation to something far more complex. Senator Albright conferred urgently with his aides, while Admiral Winthrop guided Astera to his table. The other diners at his table made room, some with obvious discomfort, others with genuine respect. You should have stayed dead, Commander, Winthrop said quietly once they were seated. They went to considerable trouble to make you disappear. Why? Astera asked, though the question was rhetorical. She knew why. Operation Cerberus had uncovered evidence that American weapons were being sold to terrorist organizations through intermediaries with connections to high-ranking officials. The mission had been sanctioned, then disavowed when it threatened to expose those connections. The usual reasons, Winthrop replied. Money, power, the avoidance of scandal. Across the restaurant, Senator Albright was making a hasty exit, surrounded by aides who shielded him from Zara's camera. The journalist let him go, recognizing that the bigger story was sitting at Admiral Winthrop's table. Zara pulled up a chair. Commander Riven, I'm Zara Thorne. I've been investigating veteran homelessness for the past year. Your name came up in my research, but always as a footnote, a tragedy, never as a survivor. That was by design, Admiral Winthrop interjected. After the explosion, when it became clear that some members of Task Force Phantom might have survived, certain parties found it more convenient to list them all as casualties rather than explain what they were doing there in the first place. Astera's hands rested on the table, still bearing the tremor that never fully subsided. The physical toll of her experiences was evident in her body, but her eyes were clear, focused in a way they hadn't been in years. How many others survived? Zara asked, directing her question to Astera. I don't know, she responded, her voice strengthening with use. We were separated after the blast. I woke up in a hospital in Turkey with no identification, no way to prove who I was. By then, the official story was already established. Task Force Phantom had died in a helicopter crash during a training exercise, thousands of miles from where we actually were. The woman with the prosthetic leg approached their table, moving with the practiced ease of someone long accustomed to her artificial limb. "Commander Riven," she said, standing at a respectful distance. "I was Medical Corps, stationed at Landstuhl when they brought in 3 unidentified operatives from an unmarked transport. That was you, wasn't it?" Astera studied the woman's face, searching for recognition. "Dr. Farah Navarro," she said finally. "You treated my team—" Dr. Navarro nodded. "They told us you were mercenaries who'd been caught in crossfire, not American military. By the time I figured out the truth, you had disappeared from the hospital. 2 others as well." "Lieutenant Kieran Devereaux and Specialist Amani West," Astera confirmed, names she hadn't spoken aloud in 3 years. "They were with me in the field hospital." "Where are they now?" Zara asked, taking notes on her phone. "If they're lucky, they're dead," Astera replied bluntly. "If not, they're like me, erased, forgotten. Surviving." Admiral Winthrop signaled to a waiter. "Bring food for the commander," he ordered, "and coffee." As they waited, Zara conducted an impromptu interview, gathering the outlines of a story that would shake the foundations of the military establishment and reach into the highest levels of government. Admiral Winthrop occasionally interjected to fill in contextual details, careful to avoid classified information, while still providing enough substance to give credibility to Astera's account. Dr. Navarro shared her perspective as well, describing how the hospital staff had been pressured to falsify records regarding the 3 patients, removing any indication of their American military connection. When the food arrived, Astera ate with methodical precision, taking small bites and chewing thoroughly. It was the careful eating of someone who had known prolonged hunger, who understood that a meal might need to last. "How did you end up homeless?" Zara asked during a pause in Astera's eating. "With no identity, no record of service, no access to benefits, what options did I have?" Astera replied. "I tried to contact people I knew, but my calls were never returned. Bank accounts I'd had were closed. My apartment had been cleared out, belongings disposed of. I existed in military records only as a deceased service member." She took a sip of coffee before continuing. "The injuries limited what work I could do. The nerve damage, the recurring migraines from the TBI. Eventually, I ran out of options." "But you kept the piano skills, Doctor," Navarro observed. A ghost of a smile crossed Astera's face. "The explosion took some things, gave others. I could play before, but not like this." The neurologist called it acquired savant syndrome, a rewiring after trauma. While they talked, the restaurant had largely emptied, the evening's entertainment having taken an unexpected turn that left many patrons uncomfortable. Only those with direct connections to the military or journalism remained, forming a protective circle around Astera and her story. Harker approached their table again, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "I've been instructed to inform you that the restaurant is closing early tonight," he said, not meeting Astera's eyes. "Management apologizes for any inconvenience." Admiral Winthrop fixed the manager with a cold stare. "Instructed by whom?" Harker shifted his weight nervously. "I'm not at liberty to say, sir." "Of course you aren't," Winthrop replied. "We'll be leaving shortly." As they prepared to depart, Astera retrieved her photograph from the piano, carefully returning it to her leather case. The instrument stood silent now, but the music she had played lingered in the memory of everyone who had heard it, a testament to beauty emerging from the most unlikely circumstances. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under streetlights. Astera stood on the sidewalk, suddenly uncertain. For 3 years, survival had been her only goal, each day a separate battle against hunger, exposure, and despair. Now, with witnesses to her identity, with her story beginning to emerge, she faced a different kind of uncertainty. "Where will you go tonight?" Zara asked, sensing her hesitation. Astera glanced toward the underpass several blocks away, where she had established a small camp, hidden from casual observation. "I have a place," she said vaguely. Admiral Winthrop shook his head. "Not anymore, you don't. You'll come with me. My wife will be delighted to make up the guest room." His tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion, but an order from a superior officer. "Sir, I can't impose," Astera began. "Commander, you've been living on the streets for years, while those responsible for your situation enjoy power and privilege," Winthrop responded sharply. The imposition is not yours. Dr. Navarro added her support. He's right, Commander. You need proper medical evaluation as well. I have colleagues at Seattle General who can be trusted. Astera looked between them, these unexpected allies who had emerged from the remnants of her former life. For so long, she had been alone, invisible, except as an object of disdain or pity. The prospect of rejoining the world of the visible, of the acknowledged, was both tempting and terrifying. What about Devereaux and West? She asked finally. If I'm alive, they might be too. Zara pocketed her phone. That's where I come in. Finding missing persons is part of my job. If they're out there, I'll find them. And then what? Astera challenged. We expose everything? There are people who would kill to keep what we found buried. Then we make the story too public to bury, Zara replied simply. The more eyes on this, the safer you all are. Admiral Winthrop offered his arm to Astera, a formal gesture from another era. One step at a time, Commander. Tonight, you rest. Tomorrow, we begin to reclaim your existence. As they walked toward the Admiral's waiting car, Astera felt the weight of her leather case against her hip, containing the only evidence of who she had been. The photograph, a few medals she had managed to keep, discharged papers that officially meant nothing now that she was listed as deceased. For the first time in 3 years, Astera Riven felt something beyond the numbing focus on survival. It wasn't quite hope, not yet, but perhaps its precursor, a sense that her story wasn't finished, that what had been erased might yet be rewritten. Behind them, Bellini's restaurant stood dark, its early closure unusual for a Friday night. The patrons who had witnessed Astera's revelation had dispersed into the city, carrying with them a story that would spread, impossible to contain now that it had been given voice through the universal language of music. 3 months passed with remarkable speed. Astera's story had begun as a whisper, then grown to a roar that couldn't be silenced. Zara's initial article had gone viral within hours of publication, drawing attention from major news outlets and triggering a Pentagon investigation that could no longer be avoided. The concert hall was filled to capacity on a clear autumn evening. Astera sat at a grand piano on stage, dressed in a simple black evening gown that contrasted with the medals properly displayed on her chest. Her fingers, though still bearing the signs of nerve damage, moved with purpose across the keys, playing an original composition she had titled Phantom Memory. The music told a story where words had failed her, capturing the experiences that had shaped her journey from decorated commander to homeless veteran, and finally to reluctant public figure. Each note spoke of loss, betrayal, and ultimately, redemption. In the front row sat Admiral Winthrop and his wife, who had become Astera's staunchest advocates. Beside them was Dr. Navarro, whose medical testimony had been crucial in establishing the truth of Astera's identity and experiences. And next to them, 2 faces that had once appeared in the faded photograph Astera had carried through years of homelessness, Lieutenant Kieran Devereaux and Specialist Imani West. Finding them had been Zara's triumph. Devereaux had been living under an assumed name in Portland, working as a night security guard, his combat skills reduced to watching surveillance monitors. West had fared better financially, having secured work as a mechanic in Detroit. But the psychological toll had been severe. Both had been shocked to learn that their commander was alive, more shocked still that she had found a way to make their story known. The benefit concert for homeless veterans had been organized after Zara's expose had gained national attention. Corporate sponsors, eager to distance themselves from Senator Albright and associate with a cause suddenly in the spotlight, had funded the event generously. The proceeds would support a new program specifically designed to identify and assist veterans who had fallen through bureaucratic cracks. As Astera's composition reached its conclusion, she allowed the final notes to resonate through the hall before lifting her hands from the keys. The audience rose in a standing ovation, a wave of support that still felt foreign to her after years of invisibility. She acknowledged their applause with a reserved nod before making her way backstage. There, in a quiet room, away from cameras and well-wishers, she reunited with the surviving members of Task Force Phantom. Devereaux embraced her first, his once imposing frame now leaner but still powerful. "Commander," he said, the title carrying weight between them. That was something else. West hung back slightly, her approach more cautious. The explosion had left more visible marks on her, a jagged scar running from temple to jaw on the left side of her face. "Never knew you could play like that," she said finally. "Guess we all had hidden talents." "Acquired savant syndrome," Astera explained, touching her temple where shrapnel had penetrated her skull. "The neurologists think the brain damage rewired something. Small compensation, all things considered." They settled into chairs arranged in a small circle, the formality of military hierarchy, giving way to the intimacy of shared trauma. For several moments, none of them spoke, each processing the surreal nature of their reunion. "I saw the hearings," Devereaux said finally, breaking the silence. Albright looked like he was about to have a stroke when they showed the evidence. Astera nodded. The congressional hearings had been broadcast nationally, a rare moment of political theater that had actually produced results. Senator Albright, confronted with irrefutable evidence of his role in abandoning American operators and then covering up their survival, had resigned in disgrace. The investigation into his actions continued, with indictments expected against several high-ranking officials. "They found the weapons cache," West added. "The serial numbers matched exactly what we documented before everything went sideways. They couldn't bury that, not with 3 separate testimonies corroborating the same details." The mission that had led to their erasure had uncovered evidence of American weapons being sold to terrorist groups through intermediaries with connections to certain officials. Rather than risk the scandal, those officials had chosen to disavow the mission entirely, reporting the team killed in action thousands of miles from their actual location. "Justice is a slow process," Astera cautioned. "We've only seen the beginning." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Zara entered, tablet in hand, her expression serious but satisfied. "They're running the story on every major network," she reported. "The full investigation, the forensic accounting trail, all of it." She showed them the screen where footage played of military police escorting a handcuffed general from the Pentagon. The man had been Albright's military liaison, the one who had signed off on listing Task Force Phantom as deceased. "What about our status?" West asked, the question they all shared. Despite the revelations, despite the public acknowledgement of their existence, their official military records still listed them as killed in action. "That's actually why I came to find you," Zara replied. "I just got word from my contact at the DoD. They're preparing to formally correct the record. Posthumous honors are being revoked and replaced with active service commendations, and back pay for the full 3 years, with interest." The news hit each of them differently. Devereaux laughed, a sound of disbelief rather than humor. West closed her eyes briefly, a moment of private relief. Astera simply nodded, accepting this development as she had all others, with a composure that had become her hallmark. "And the medical benefits?" she asked, thinking not of herself but of West, whose facial scarring concealed more extensive neurological damage. "Full reinstatement, plus additional compensation for the period of denial," Zara confirmed, "and an expedited process for any claims related to injuries sustained during Operation Cerberus." A staff member appeared at the door, informing Astera that her presence was requested for the reception following the concert. She acknowledged the message with a nod, then turned back to her team. "This doesn't erase what happened," she said quietly. "Nothing can do that, but it's something." "It's more than something," Devereaux countered. "It's everything. You gave us our names back, Commander." When they emerged from the backstage area, they were met with a sight none of them had anticipated. Lining the hallway to the reception area stood dozens of veterans in varying states of formal dress, some in wheelchairs, others with visible prosthetics, all standing at attention. As Astera passed, they rendered salutes in perfect unison. The man at the head of the line stepped forward. "Staff Sergeant Elijah Monroe, ma'am, we wanted to thank you personally. What you did, it wasn't just for your team, it was for all of us who've been forgotten." Astera returned his salute crisply. "At ease, Sergeant, the fight isn't over." "No, ma'am, it's not," he agreed. "But now we're fighting in the open, not alone in the dark." The reception that followed was both celebratory and purposeful. Representatives from veterans organizations mixed with politicians eager to associate themselves with the cause, now that it had become politically expedient to do so. Journalists circulated, gathering quotes and observations for follow-up stories. Astera moved through the crowd with the same tactical awareness she had once applied to combat situations, navigating conversations with precision and purpose. She had become an unexpected symbol, her story a rallying point for broader issues of veteran care and accountability. As the evening drew to a close, she found herself standing near a large window overlooking the city. The lights of Seattle spread before her like a field of stars, a view so different from the underpass where she had sheltered during rainstorms, similar to the one that had driven her into Bellini's 3 months ago. Dr. Navarro joined her at the window. "You've started something important," she observed, "something that's already changing lives." "I just wanted to be acknowledged," Astera replied honestly. "To exist in the official record again." "And now?" Astera considered the question, looking out at the city where she had been invisible for so long. "Now, I want to make sure no one else disappears like we did." Veterans, especially those with combat trauma, they slip through cracks in the system every day. Not as dramatically as we did, but the result is the same. They become ghosts while still alive. As they spoke, a young veteran approached hesitantly. "Commander Riven," he began, his voice unsteady. "I served in Syria, came back with TBI similar to yours. They told me the symptoms were psychological, that I was exaggerating for benefits. Tonight, hearing your story, seeing you play like that after everything, it gave me hope." Astera recognized in him the same lost expression she had seen in her own reflection for years. "What's your name, soldier?" "Corporal Jackson Bennett, ma'am." "Well, Corporal Bennett, hope is just the beginning. What you need are proper medical evaluations, treatment options, and advocates who won't take no for an answer." She introduced him to Dr. Navarro, who immediately began discussing specific neurologists who specialized in combat-related TBI. As they talked, Astera saw Zara watching from across the room, a knowing smile on her face. The journalist raised her glass in a small salute, acknowledging without words that their work was far from finished. Later, as Astera prepared to leave, she encountered Admiral Winthrop near the exit. "You've done well, Commander," he said simply. "Your parents would have been proud." The mention of her family, long gone before her military career had even begun, was unexpected. "Thank you, sir." "What will you do next?" he asked. "The military would welcome you back, though I suspect your playing days would be over." Astera glanced back at the concert hall, where her piano still stood on stage. "I think I've found a new way to serve," she replied. "Music reaches people in ways words can't, and right now, there are too many veterans who need to be reached." Outside, the night air carried a hint of the coming winter. Astera walked away from the concert hall, back straight, no longer invisible, but carrying with her the memory of what it meant to be unseen. That experience, painful as it had given her insight that would shape whatever came next. In the distance, a lone figure watched her departure. Lieutenant Devereaux, having slipped away from the reception early, stood in shadows cast by streetlights. He had been the first to believe her dead, the first to mourn her loss, and now the witness to her resurrection. As she passed beyond his view, he offered one final salute to the commander, who had refused to remain silenced. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition, but deserved more than anyone else? Someone whose quiet strength changed lives without fanfare? Share their story. Some heroes walk among us unnoticed until music or truth gives them voice.